In the bright lights of Hollywood, some stars shined so powerfully that the world believed they would never fade. But behind the glamour, a silent enemy was already erasing their memories, piece by piece. This is the haunting journey of 12 legends whose minds slipped away long before their final breaths, their stories now echoing in the shadows they left behind. Number 1. Ronald Reagan. He was once the face of American optimism, a man whose smile could fill a room and whose presence could command an entire nation. Long before the world knew him as president, Ronald Reagan was a bright star of Hollywood's golden age, appearing in more than 50 films and becoming a symbol of strength, charm, and quiet confidence. But behind the legend, time was already preparing a cruel ending, one that would slowly dim every memory that had shaped his extraordinary life. In the late 1980s, subtle signs began to appear. Those closest to him noticed the pauses in his speech, the hesitation in his once effortless delivery, the way familiar names seemed to slip just beyond reach. At first, it was easy to see it as exhaustion from years of public service. But the truth was far more devastating, a truth that Reagan himself chose to confront with dignity. In November 1994, he wrote the letter that stunned the world. In simple words filled with humility, he revealed that he had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. He spoke of beginning the journey that will lead me into the sunset of my life, a line that echoed through households across America. It was not just an announcement, it was a farewell whispered years too soon. From that moment on, Reagan retreated from public life. Nancy Reagan, his devoted partner, became his constant guardian, watching over him with unwavering strength as the world's memories of him clashed with the memories he could no longer hold. Their home in Bel Air became a sanctuary, a quiet place where each day grew smaller, and each moment became an echo of what once had been. Neighbors sometimes saw him walking slowly through the garden, pausing to admire the roses without realizing they had been planted for him. As the disease tightened its grip, the man who once stood before tens of thousands no longer recognized the faces around him. Memory after memory slipped away. Childhood, film sets, political triumphs, even the familiar warmth of old friendships. Yet there was still a gentleness in him, a soft calm that surfaced whenever Nancy held his hand or played the music he used to love. She later described those years as the long goodbye, a stretch of time that felt endless and heartbreakingly short all at once. The disease did not take him suddenly. It took him in fragments, small pieces falling into darkness until very little remained of the vibrant mind the world had admired. And still, Nancy stayed beside him, turning her grief into a mission to raise awareness and fund research, hoping to spare other families from the same silent devastation. By the early 2000s, Reagan's decline was undeniable. He no longer recognized visitors. He no longer spoke of the past. His world had narrowed to the quiet corners of his home and the soft presence of those who cared for him. On June 5, 2004, Ronald Reagan passed away at the age of 93. The cause was pneumonia, but Alzheimer's had already taken him years before. When the news reached the nation, millions mourned not just a former president, but a man who had once been a symbol of resilience, hope, and possibility. Crowds lined the streets of Washington as his coffin passed, honoring the actor, the leader, the dreamer, and the human being who had faced his final battle far from the spotlight. His story became one of the most public reminders of a disease that steals without mercy, a thief that robs even the brightest minds of their greatest treasures. And so, Ronald Reagan's final legacy was not just political or cinematic. It was the reminder that even the strongest among us can be touched by a darkness no applause can overcome. But in that darkness, the humanity he carried, the gratitude, the gentleness, the courage remained. And those are the memories the world refuses to forget. Number 2. Gene Wilder. He was the magician of gentle madness, a man whose eyes carried both innocence and sorrow, capable of making the world laugh even when his own heart felt heavy. Gene Wilder was more than a comedian, he was an artist of emotion, a storyteller who blended humor with heartbreak in a way no one else could. Throughout the 1970s, he became one of Hollywood's most unforgettable figures, creating characters that lived far beyond the screen. From the whimsical wonder of Willy Wonka to the chaotic brilliance of young Frankenstein, he shaped the childhoods and imaginations of millions. His performances were never loud or desperate for attention. They were delicate, precise, alive. And perhaps that is why the truth of his final years felt so painfully cruel. In the late 2000s, the first signs appeared, subtle enough to hide behind excuses. He forgot lines during private readings, paused mid-sentence with a distant look, or repeated small details as if discovering them for the first time. His loved ones sensed something deeper, something frightening. When doctors finally confirmed Alzheimer's disease, Wilder made a decision that revealed the depth of his kindness. He chose to keep his diagnosis private. He feared that if children, those who adored him as Willy Wonka, learned he was ill, their memories would change, and he never wanted his legacy to become a source of sadness. Even in decline, he was protecting the innocence of others. His wife, Karen, became his quiet guardian. She shielded him from the public eye, ensuring that his final years were lived not under the scrutiny of Hollywood, but in the softness of ordinary days. Music, especially the warm voice of Ella Fitzgerald, became his refuge. Family members recalled how he would close his eyes and smile faintly whenever her songs filled the room, as if the rhythm could anchor him to fragments of a life he once knew. He tended to small moments, flowers on the porch, sunlight through a window, the simple comfort of holding hands. Even as his memory slipped away, his gentleness remained untouched, a reminder that illness could not erase the essence of who he was. Visitors said he still had flashes of humor, soft murmurs of curiosity, brief sparks of recognition when people spoke about old films. But those moments grew rare as the disease advanced. The man whose imagination had once brought entire worlds to life now drifted through his days in quiet confusion. And yet there was no anger in him, no bitterness, only a peaceful surrender to the fading light. On August 29, 2016, Gene Wilder took his final breath at his home in Stamford, Connecticut. He was surrounded by family, and in the background, Somewhere Over the Rainbow played softly. His loved ones chose that song because it had always soothed him, reminding him of childhood memories he could no longer name. When the news broke, the world paused. Tributes poured in from fans, actors, comedians, filmmakers, and countless people who had grown up believing in magic because of him. Many said they cried not out of grief alone, but out of a sense of intimate loss. Gene Wilder had been the gentle guide through their own childhood dreams. His death revealed the secret battle he had hidden for years, a battle fought quietly so the world would remember him not with pity, but with joy. And that is precisely what happened. His legacy became a soft glow, rather than a shadow, a testament to the kindness that shaped his entire life. Alzheimer's may have taken his memories, but it could not touch the laughter he left behind. His films continue to spark wonder, to inspire imagination, to remind audiences of a time when stories felt like magic and every moment carried a hint of sweetness. Gene Wilder's light did not fade. It simply shifted, settling permanently in the hearts of those who understood the delicate beauty of a man who made the world smile even as his own memories slipped away. Number 3. Sidney Poitier. He was a force of dignity in a world that often offered none, a man whose very presence reshaped the boundaries of American cinema. Sidney Poitier did not simply act, he challenged, he confronted, he transformed. In the 1950s and 60s, at a time when Hollywood allowed few opportunities for actors of color, Poitier rose with a grace so powerful that the industry itself had no choice but to change. His performances were confident, calm, and filled with an inner fire that made every word feel like truth. With films such as Lilies of the Field, In the Heat of the Night, and Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, he carried not just characters, but the weight of representation for millions who had never seen themselves reflected with such respect. But even trailblazers are not spared the quiet tragedies that life can bring. In his private world, long after the applause had softened, subtle signs of decline began to appear. He forgot small details, repeated conversations, hesitated in moments where clarity once came effortlessly. Those close to him recognized what he kept hidden from the public, the early shadows of Alzheimer's disease. Poitier faced the illness quietly, without spectacle or drama. For a man who had broken barriers under the strongest lights, his final battle unfolded away from cameras in the gentle privacy of home. By the late 1990s, he stepped back from acting, choosing a life of reflection surrounded by family rather than the world that had once demanded every part of him. His loved ones, devoted and protective, shielded him from scrutiny as his memory slipped gradually into mist. Friends recalled that even as the disease tightened its grip, Poitier's inherent kindness remained. A warm smile, a soft nod, a look of recognition that flickered for a moment before vanishing again. These fragments carried the essence of a man who had lived with profound purpose. His daughters often spoke of him with tenderness, remembering his calm voice and the steadiness in his presence, a steadiness that lingered even when words no longer came easily. He had once said that acting was about dignity, and in his final years he lived that belief quietly, with a strength that spoke louder than any performance. Alzheimer's may have stolen timelines, faces, and stories, but it never touched the core of who he was. On January 6, 2022, at the age of 94, Sidney Poitier passed away peacefully at his home in Los Angeles. The official statement listed heart failure as the primary cause, with Alzheimer's and prostate cancer as underlying conditions. When the news broke, the world responded with a wave of admiration and grief. Presidents, global leaders, actors, musicians, voices from every corner of society paid tribute to the man who had stood at the crossroads of art and history. They remembered the first black man to win the Academy Award for Best Actor, the performer who shadowed stereotypes, the activist who believed in humanity's better self, and the father whose humility was as remarkable as his achievements. But beyond the honors, beyond the iconic roles, Sidney Poitier's legacy is something quieter and more enduring. He showed that a single life lived with courage and integrity can change the direction of an entire industry. His final years may have been marked by silence, but his influence remains loud, woven into every opportunity now open to those who followed his path. Alzheimer's could dim his memories, but it could not erase the doors he opened or the hope he inspired in countless hearts. In the end, Poitier did what he had done his entire life. He carried himself with grace, he defied limitations, and he left behind a light so steady that even time cannot dim it. Number 4. Charlton Heston. He was the kind of Hollywood titan who seemed carved from stone, broad-shouldered, commanding, and larger than life. Charlton Heston didn't just play heroes, he embodied them. From Moses parting the Red Sea and the Ten Commandments, to Judah Ben-Hur thundering through the chariot arena, to the desperate astronaut cursing fate in Planet of the Apes, Heston defined the epic spirit of mid-century American cinema. His voice was unmistakable, his presence overwhelming, and to generations of moviegoers, he was a symbol of strength in a world constantly shifting beneath their feet. But even the mightiest heroes cannot outrun the quiet erosion of time, and the battle that awaited him in his final years was one no sword, no command, no defiance could fight. In August 2002, at a small press conference few expected, Heston stood before cameras and delivered the words that stunned the world. His voice trembled just slightly, barely noticeable from a man known for iron certainty, as he revealed he had been diagnosed with symptoms consistent with Alzheimer's disease. There was no melodrama, no tears, only gratitude for the life he had lived and the family who stood beside him. He ended his statement with a quiet promise to face the road ahead with dignity. It was one of the rare moments when the public saw the man behind the myth, stripped of the armor of his roles, yet somehow braver than ever. After that announcement, Heston retreated from public life. His wife, Lydia, his partner of more than half a century, became his constant companion, guiding him through the slow fading of a mind once as sharp as the characters he portrayed. Their Beverly Hills home, once filled with scripts, paintings, and the vibrant energy of a life in the spotlight, became a sanctuary of calm. Friends who visited said he spent much of his time surrounded by books and music from his old films, the scores that had carried him through cinematic history. Sometimes the music stirred a spark in him, his eyes lifting, a faint smile returning, as if a fragment of a memories long buried rose briefly to the surface. Those moments were rare but precious. As the disease progressed, the man who had once commanded armies on screen grew quieter, gentler, more inward. He no longer spoke about his legendary career, no longer recognized the sets of memorabilia carefully preserved around him. His world grew smaller, but Lydia remained steadfast. She cared for him with unwavering devotion, shielding him from the media, ensuring he lived his final years not as an icon breaking apart under the public gaze, but as a human being surrounded by love. Alzheimer stripped away the details of his past, but it could not take the grace in the way he carried himself or the loyalty he inspired in those closest to him. On April 5, 2008, Charlton Heston passed away at the age of 84. Pneumonia was listed as the cause of death, but everyone who knew his story understood the truth. Alzheimer's had taken him years earlier, piece by piece. When news of his passing broke, tributes poured in from across the world. Directors, co-stars, politicians, historians, and fans mourned the end of an era. They remembered not just the heroism he projected on screen, but the discipline, professionalism, and passion he brought to every role. He was, in every sense, a giant of his craft. Even in death, his legacy remained monumental. Heston represented a time when Hollywood dared to dream in grand, sweeping gestures, when its heroes were unapologetically bold, and their stories unapologetically epic. Alzheimer's may have dimmed the light of his final years, but it could not extinguish the cinematic fire he left behind. His performances remain immortal, etched into film history with the same intensity he carried throughout his life. And so, in the vast landscape of Hollywood legends, Charlton Heston stands forever tall, a warrior of the screen whose final battle was fought in silence, far from the roar of the crowd, yet with the same unwavering courage that defined his every step. Number 5. Charles Bronson. He was Hollywood's quiet storm, a man who rarely raised his voice, yet commanded more presence than actors who shouted every line. Charles Bronson became the embodiment of the working-class hero, tough, silent, relentless. His rugged face, steel-eyed stare, and unshakable intensity turned him into an icon of 1960s and 70s American cinema. From The Magnificent Seven to The Great Escape to the Death Wish series, Bronson didn't just play hardened men, he was the living definition of grit. Audiences believed every word he spoke because he spoke so few. When he appeared on screen, you didn't just watch him, you felt him. But behind that stone exterior was a private man, gentle in spirit, fiercely devoted to family, and far more introspective than the characters that made him famous. By the mid-1990s, those closest to Bronson noticed changes that didn't match his disciplined nature. He began pausing in conversations, forgetting appointments, misplacing familiar objects. At first, it was easy to blame age or exhaustion from a career spent under hat lights and long shooting schedules. But as the slips became more frequent, the truth grew harder to ignore. Doctors eventually confirmed what his family feared. Bronson was suffering from Alzheimer's disease, a diagnosis that quietly marked the beginning of his final and most personal battle. For a man who had spent a lifetime portraying characters in control of every situation, this illness stripped away that control piece by piece, leaving behind the fragile edges of a life once defined by certainty. His wife, Kim Weeks, became his anchor through the storm. The world that once knew Bronson as an unstoppable force now faded into silence as he withdrew from public life. Their home in Beverly Hills transformed into a place of calm, filled with family photographs and memories of a career that had spanned decades. Friends who visited during those years said the contrast was overwhelming. The tough, stoic figure seen on film had softened into a gentle, almost childlike presence. He rarely spoke, but there were moments, tiny sparks, when a familiar look crossed his face, as if he could still feel echoes of the man he used to be. Alzheimer's may have stolen his memories, but it could not erase the dignity with which he carried himself. In his final years, Bronson spent long hours sitting quietly, often near the window where sunlight spilled across the room. Children and grandchildren visited often, filling the house with warmth he could still sense even when he no longer knew their names. Music from his old films occasionally stirred a faint smile, a reminder that somewhere deep inside, the pieces of his past still flickered. He was no longer the cinematic outsider who walked through chaos untouched, but he remained strong in a different way, a quiet, enduring strength that did not need words or action to be felt. On August 30, 2003, Charles Bronson passed away at the age of 81. The official cause was pneumonia, with Alzheimer's listed as a contributing factor. When the news broke, the world mourned the loss of the last true face of old-school masculinity. Tributes poured in from every corner of the industry. Directors remembered his discipline. Co-stars admired his humility. Fans celebrated the authenticity he brought to every role. Even in silence, Bronson had maintained an unbreakable presence, one that Hollywood has never been able to replicate. His legacy lives in the characters he immortalized, the man who stood alone, who fought for justice when no one else would, who carried pain behind his eyes but moved forward anyway. Alzheimer's may have taken his memories, but it could not take the truth that defined him. Charles Bronson remains a symbol of strength, not the loud, explosive kind, but the kind that endures quietly, powerfully, eternally. And in that way, he is still here. Number 6. Raquel Welch. She was one of Hollywood's most enduring visions of beauty, a woman whose presence could silence a room and whose confidence reshaped an entire era. Raquel Welch wasn't just a star, she was a phenomenon. From the moment she appeared on screen in the 1960s, audiences were captivated. Her breakout role in 1,000,000 Years BC turned her into a global icon overnight, her image becoming one of the most recognizable of the century. But beneath the glamour and the legend was a determined, disciplined woman who fought tirelessly to be seen for her talent rather than the image the world projected onto her. She proved herself again and again in films like Fantastic Voyage, The Three Musketeers, and Kansas City Bomber, earning the respect of critics who once doubted her. Raquel wasn't just beautiful, she was bold, intelligent, and fiercely in control of her destiny. Yet even a life defined by strength can be touched by a quiet, invisible enemy. By the late 2010s, those closest to her began noticing the subtle shifts that Alzheimer's often introduce: moments of forgetfulness, lost words, small flickers of confusion that didn't match the sharp, poised woman the world had always known. Raquel retreated from public life, choosing privacy over spectacle. Few people realized that she was facing an illness she refused to let define her. Her family protected her fiercely, keeping the details of her condition out of the public eye. She had spent a lifetime fighting to control her narrative, and even as the disease tightened its grip, that control remained important to her. She spent her days in quiet reflection, surrounded by the warmth of familiar faces and the collection of memories that filled her home. Photographs, scripts, costumes, and moments frozen in time. Her loved ones later described her final years as peaceful, marked by gentle routines and the soft echoes of old Hollywood melodies she still seemed to enjoy. Though her memory slipped away, her demeanor remained graceful. Caregivers recalled the same calm smile, the same elegance in the way she carried herself, even in silence. She stayed close to family, her world shrinking not out of fear, but out of a desire for comfort and dignity. Raquel Welch was a woman who had spent decades under the relentless gaze of the world, and in her last chapter, she finally lived away from it, wrapped in the quiet beauty of a life lived fully. On February 15, 2023, Raquel Welch passed away at the age of 82. Cardiac arrest was listed as the official cause, with Alzheimer's noted as an underlying condition. When the news broke, Hollywood reacted with a wave of emotion. Actors, directors, and fans from every corner of the world shared tributes, remembering not just the icon, but the trailblazer, the woman who refused to be defined by anyone but herself. Many spoke about the strength behind her beauty, the determination behind her soft-spoken confidence, and the impact she had on generations of actresses who followed. Raquel Welch's story is a reminder that even legends are vulnerable, and that beneath the bright lights of fame lie human battles fought quietly and bravely. Alzheimer's may have dimmed her memories, but it could not erase the legacy she carved into Hollywood history. She remains a symbol of power, resilience, and independence, a woman who took control of her path, defied expectations, and left behind a presence so luminous that time itself cannot dim it. Her beauty may have captured the world, but it was her strength that made her unforgettable. Number 7. Rita Hayworth. She was the shimmering dream of Hollywood's golden age, a woman whose face alone could stop hearts and whose presence redefined what it meant to be a star. Rita Hayworth wasn't just admired, she was adored, worshipped, immortalized as the very essence of glamour. In the 1940s, she ruled the screen with films like Gilda, CoverGirl, and The Lady from Shanghai. Her grace so magnetic that audiences around the world believed she was untouchable. But behind the beauty and the flawless performances was a woman carrying more pain than anyone imagined. Her life off-screen was marked by heartbreak, tumultuous relationships, and a relentless search for peace. And while millions fell in love with the legend, the woman behind it all was slowly slipping into a silent battle no one yet understood. By the late 1960s, the first signs appeared, subtle, easy to dismiss. She forgot lines during filming, misplaced familiar objects, and arrived at events confused or disoriented. Rumors swirled through Hollywood. Was it alcohol, exhaustion, emotional strain? At the time, few even knew the word Alzheimer's. Rita herself couldn't explain what was happening, only that something inside her mind felt fragmented, as though her memories were slipping through her fingers like sand. Those closest to her watched in helpless fear as one of the brightest lights of Hollywood began to dim far too soon. In 1981, after years of misdiagnoses and misunderstanding, doctors finally named the truth: Alzheimer's disease. She became one of the first major public figures associated with the illness, and her decline, once whispered about in gossip columns, suddenly carried devastating clarity. Her daughter, Princess Yasmin Aga Khan, stepped into the role of caregiver, dedicating her life to protecting and comforting the mother the world had claimed but never truly knew. Rita spent her days in silence, often sitting near a window, her eyes lost in a distance no one else could see. Yet even as memories dissolved, fragments of her elegance remained. Visitors spoke of her gentle smiles, the soft way she moved, the quiet melody in her voice when music from her old films played. It was as if the rhythm of her past still lingered somewhere deep inside, untouched by the disease. Her final years were spent out of the spotlight, shielded from the world that had once adored her. Surrounded by family and caregivers, she lived in a small, protected world where time moved slowly and gently. The transformation was heartbreaking. A woman once known as the love goddess, now living in the shadows of a mind she could no longer hold on to. But through her suffering, something unexpected happened. Her story, her struggle, became a turning point in public understanding of Alzheimer's. Her daughter became an advocate, raising awareness and millions of dollars for research, determined to ensure that her pain would inspire change. On May 14, 1987, Rita Hayworth passed away at the age of 68. Her death sent shockwaves through the entertainment world. She became more than a symbol of beauty. She became the face of a devastating illness that had taken so much from her. Tributes poured in across the globe. Critics and co-stars remembered her as radiant, soulful, unforgettable. Fans mourned not only the loss of a film icon, but the tragedy of a life slowly unraveled from within. Rita Hayworth's story remains one of Hollywood's most haunting. Alzheimer's stole her memories, her spark, the very essence of who she was. But it could not erase the legacy she left behind. She helped the world understand a disease that had remained in the shadows for too long. And today, her light endures not just in her timeless films, but in the fight for knowledge and compassion she unknowingly inspired. Rita Hayworth may have faded from memory, but the world will never forget her. Number 8. Peter Falk. He was the most unassuming genius television ever produced, a man whose wrinkled raincoat, gentle squint, and disarming smile became one of the most iconic signatures in entertainment history. Peter Falk didn't need explosions, theatrics, or polished perfection to captivate millions. All he needed was a tilted head, a curious pause, and that legendary line delivered with charming hesitation: just one more thing. As Lieutenant Columbo, he became a global phenomenon, an ordinary-looking detective who was always underestimated, always polite, and always brilliant. For more than 3 decades, viewers watched him unravel the truth with quiet persistence and razor intuition. But behind the beloved character was a man equally warm, witty, and deeply human. And like many legends before him, his final act unfolded far from the lights that once celebrated him. In the early 2000s, the first hints of decline began to show. Friends noticed he sometimes forgot conversations, misplaced items, or repeated the same question within minutes. At first, these were waved away as exhaustion or age, nothing more. But the changes grew harder to ignore. In 2008, doctors confirmed what those closest to him feared. Peter Falk was living with Alzheimer's disease. The diagnosis struck deeply, not because he was a public figure, but because Falk had built a career on intelligence, memory, and subtle detail. He had inhabited a character defined by mental sharpness, and now he faced a disease that would take that from him piece by piece. His wife, Shira, became his shield. She protected him from the public, from the press, and from the emotional burden of watching himself fade in the public eye. Their home in Beverly Hills transformed into a haven where time moved softly, untouched by the pressures of fame. Visitors described moments of bittersweet beauty, Falk smiling when someone mentioned Columbo, or humming along when the show's theme music played in the background. These flickers of recognition were precious, as though fragments of the detective still lingered deep within him. As the illness progressed, the man who once charmed millions with a simple glance grew quieter, his world shrinking into a gentle fog. Words became difficult, memories blurred. The witty spark in his eyes dimmed slowly but unmistakably. Yet even in the later stages of the disease, caregivers remembered how polite he remained, how he would still reach out to hold a hand, offering small gestures of warmth from a place he could no longer fully navigate. He was never angry, never combative, only lost, drifting through a maze of fading moments. On June 23, 2011, Peter Falk passed away at the age of 83. Pneumonia was listed as the cause, with Alzheimer's as a major underlying factor. The world mourned not just an actor, but a companion. For decades, fans welcomed him into their homes, sitting beside him as he solved mysteries with humor, humility, and unmatched brilliance. Tributes flowed from every corner of the globe. Actors and directors spoke of his generosity and creativity. Fans recalled how Columbo had shaped their childhoods, their love for storytelling, their belief that intelligence doesn't have to be loud to change the world. Peter Falk's legacy is woven into television history. He proved that heroes don't need capes, muscles, or perfect hair. They only need heart, patience, and the courage to ask the right questions. Alzheimer's may have taken his memories, but it could not take the joy, comfort, and inspiration he gave to millions. And even now, when audiences hear the gentle rustle of that raincoat or the soft tap of his shoes as he turns back one last time, they smile, because Peter Falk is still there, still brilliant, still beloved. Number 9. James Doohan. He was the heartbeat of the Starship Enterprise, the man whose steady hands and quick mind saved the crew more times than any captain could count. James Doohan didn't just play Montgomery's Scotty Scott, he defined him. With his unmistakable Scottish accent, his frantic brilliance in the engine room, and his iconic line, "I'm giving her all she's got, Captain," Doohan became a legend in the world of science fiction. But long before he ever stepped onto a Hollywood set, he lived a life filled with real heroism. During World War II, he served bravely with the Royal Canadian Artillery and was wounded during the D-Day invasion. The discipline, courage, and resilience he carried from the battlefield shaped every role he ever played. He wasn't just acting, he was drawing from the heart of a man who had already survived the unimaginable. And yet, even heroes who endure the fire of war are not immune to the quiet devastation of time. By the late 1990s, Doohan's friends noticed that something was changing. He struggled to remember details, repeated stories, or appeared momentarily lost in familiar places. What at first looked like simple forgetfulness soon revealed itself as something deeper. In 2004, surrounded by family, he publicly confirmed what many had begun to fear. He had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. The announcement was heartbreaking, especially to fans who had watched him embody brilliance for decades. But there was no anger in him, no bitterness, only acceptance and gratitude for the life he had lived. Later that year, he made his final public appearance, joined by his fellow Star Trek cast members. He smiled gently, shaking hands, thanking fans who had supported him for a lifetime. Behind that smile, though, the decline had already begun. In the months that followed, his wife Wendy became his constant caregiver, creating a peaceful world where he could spend his final years in comfort. Their home in Redmond, Washington, filled with photographs, fan letters, and memorabilia from his long career, became a refuge. Music brought him brief clarity. Soundtracks from Star Trek, old jazz standards, songs from his childhood. Sometimes his eyes would brighten, recognizing something that lived beyond memory, deeper than thought. Visitors described how he still laughed at familiar jokes, how he squeezed hands with warmth, how he seemed peaceful even as the disease erased the details of his extraordinary life. His world grew smaller, quieter, softer, but never cold. On July 20, 2005, James Doohan passed away at the age of 85. Pneumonia was listed as the cause of death, with Alzheimer's as a contributing factor. When the news spread, tributes flooded in from around the world, not just from actors and fans, but from scientists and engineers. NASA engineers wrote letters. Aerospace students shared stories. Hundreds said that Scotty had inspired them to pursue careers they once believed were impossible. One even said, "I'm an engineer because James Doohan taught me that science could save lives." Few actors leave that kind of legacy. In the years after his passing, a portion of Doohan's ashes were carried into space, a final voyage befitting a man who had spent a lifetime exploring the stars in the hearts of millions. His memory lives on in the hum of engineering rooms, in the spark of imagination he ignited, and in the timeless dream of exploration he helped inspire. Alzheimer's may have taken his memories, but it could not touch the universe he left behind. To this day, whenever fans revisit the corridors of the Enterprise and hear his urgent voice echoing through the chaos, one truth remains clear. James Doohan didn't just portray a hero of the future, he was one. Number 10. Burgess Meredith. He was one of Hollywood's most versatile chameleons, a man who seemed to reinvent himself with every decade. To older generations, Burgess Meredith was the intense and soulful performer from films like Of Mice and Men and The Story of G.I. Joe. To younger audiences, he was the fiery, gravel-voiced boxing trainer Mickey in Rocky, pushing a young fighter toward greatness with tough love and unforgettable lines. And to an entirely different corner of pop culture, he was the mischievous Penguin in the 1960s Batman series. Few actors in history have managed to touch so many generations in so many different ways, yet Burgess Meredith did it with ease. His talent was unmistakable, his presence magnetic, and his voice instantly recognizable. But behind the many faces he brought to the screen was a private man whose final years unfolded in a much quieter, more fragile world. By the early 1990s, subtle signs of decline began to show. Close friends noticed him losing his place in conversations, repeating old stories, or pausing as though searching for memories he could no longer quite grasp. At first, these small fractures in recollection felt like normal aging, but gradually the truth became impossible to ignore. Doctors confirmed that he was suffering from Alzheimer's disease, a diagnosis that brought a quiet sadness to those who loved him. For decades, Meredith had built a career on nuance, complexity, and emotional intelligence. Now he was facing a disease determined to strip those very abilities from him. The man who had once commanded stages and screens with effortless confidence began to retreat from public life, finding comfort in the solitude of his Malibu home. His wife, Kaja, became his constant caregiver, guiding him through a world that slowly began to slip away from him. Their home filled with the soft sound of ocean waves, one of Meredith's greatest joys. He often sat by the window for hours, watching the sunset over the Pacific. Visitors describe these moments as hauntingly peaceful. Even as his memory faded, there were flashes of the man he once was. A quick remark, a faint smile, the familiar sparkle that briefly returned to his eyes when someone mentioned Rocky or hummed the theme from one of his old films. These moments were fleeting, but precious, glimpses of a life that had been lived so vividly, now dimming softly at the edges. As the illness progressed, he grew quieter, more introspective, drifting into long silences that carried a weight only those who had known him intimately could understand. Yet he remained gentle, dignified, and kind. His caregivers often spoke of his calm presence, noting that Alzheimer's had taken his memories but not his spirit. He still responded to music, especially classical pieces he had loved in his youth. Sometimes he would close his eyes and let the sound guide him somewhere unreachable to everyone but him. It was as though, in those moments, memory was not something lost, but something freed. On September 9, 1997, Burgess Meredith passed away at the age of 89. Alzheimer's disease and melanoma were listed as the causes, marking the end of an extraordinary 60-year career. When news of his death broke, tributes poured in from actors, directors, and fans across generations. Some remembered the fierce determination of Mickey. Others cherished the charm of the Penguin. And many older fans recalled the depth he brought to the dramatic roles of his early career. But no matter which version of Burgess Meredith the world remembered, they all agreed on one thing: he was irreplaceable. His legacy lives on not just in his films, but in the emotional truth he brought to every character. He understood humanity in all its contradictions, its strength, its frailty, its humor, its heartbreak. Alzheimer's may have blurred the edges of his final years, but it could not erase the echoes he left behind. Burgess Meredith remains a testament to the power of storytelling, a reminder that even as memories fade, the art we create can live forever. Number 11. Eddie Albert. He was one of Hollywood's warmest souls, a man whose presence brought comfort, charm, and an easy smile to millions of homes. Eddie Albert wasn't the loudest star, nor the most flamboyant, but he was unforgettable. With a career that spanned nearly 7 decades, he proved himself a master of versatility. He earned Academy Award nominations for Roman Holiday and The Heartbreak Kid, but to countless families, he would forever be Oliver Wendell Douglas, the lovable city man turned farmer in the classic sitcom Green Acres. His gentle humor, expressive face, and unmistakable sincerity made him a rare kind of performer, one who felt like family to the audience watching him. Yet beyond the laughter and the roles, Albert was a real-life hero, someone whose courage stretched far beyond the screen. During World War II, Eddie Albert served in the U.S. Navy, where he risked his life rescuing Marines under heavy fire during the Battle of Tarawa. For his bravery, he received the Bronze Star with Combat V. That combination, actor, humanitarian, decorated veteran, made him a man of remarkable depth. Off-screen, he dedicated decades of his life to environmental activism, speaking passionately about conservation long before it was fashionable. He lived with purpose, conviction, and a quiet optimism that seemed to radiate from him. So when the early signs of Alzheimer's appeared in the late 1990s, the heartbreak among those who loved him was profound. A man who had lived such an expansive life was facing a disease determined to shrink his world. His son, actor Edward Albert, became his greatest support. Their bond was strong: 2 artists, 2 advocates, 2 human beings bound by love and shared purpose. As Eddie's memory began to slip, Edward filled his days with music, stories, and gentle reminders of the past they had built together. Visitors recalled how Eddie still hummed tunes from his early career, still smiled when someone mentioned Green Acres, still responded to kindness with kindness. The disease might have taken his clarity, but it never dimmed his warmth. Caregivers often remarked that he remained cheerful, polite, and tender-hearted. There was no bitterness, only the soft glow of a man who had spent a lifetime giving joy to others. Eddie Albert's final years were quiet, spent in his Pacific Palisades home surrounded by garden paths, sunlight, and familiar comforts. His world had grown smaller, but it was filled with love. Perhaps the most poignant chapter of this time involved his son, Edward, who continued to care for him even as he fought his own battle with illness. Their devotion to each other became a story in itself, one that reflected the true heart of the man behind the roles. On May 26, 2005, Eddie Albert passed away at the extraordinary age of 99. Pneumonia was listed as the cause, with Alzheimer's disease as a contributing factor. The world mourned a man whose career touched nearly every corner of American entertainment. Tributes poured in honoring his humor, his heroism, his environmental work, and his unwavering kindness. Many fans described feeling as though they had lost a friend, a testament to the sincerity that defined him. Eddie Albert's legacy is not just in the roles he played, but in the spirit he shared with the world. He lived a life of purpose, integrity, and compassion, proving that greatness is not measured by fame alone, but by the impact we leave on others. Alzheimer's may have dimmed his memories, but it could not erase the joy he created, the lives he touched, or the love he carried. And in that way, Eddie Albert remains forever present, a gentle light in Hollywood's long, complicated history. Number 12. Jack Lord. He was the face of unwavering authority on American television, a man whose presence could command a room with a single glance. Jack Lord became an icon through Hawaii Five-0, portraying Steve McGarrett, the sharp, disciplined detective whose catchphrase, "Book 'em, Dano," became one of the most recognizable lines in TV history. With his steely gaze, sculpted features, and calm intensity, Lord didn't just play a leader, he embodied one. For 12 seasons, audiences trusted him, admired him, and followed him through the sun-drenched dangers of Hawaii's criminal underworld. But behind the strength and precision of his on-screen persona was a private man who valued solitude, discipline, and the simple beauty of his island home. And in the final years of his life, he faced a battle that unfolded far from the spotlight he once commanded. In the early 1990s, those closest to him began noticing small but unsettling signs. He occasionally forgot appointments, repeated questions, or lost his way around familiar places. Jack Lord, known for his sharp memory and meticulous control, now seemed momentarily adrift. Gradually, the truth became undeniable. He was living with Alzheimer's disease. The diagnosis marked the beginning of his withdrawal from public life. A man who had once stood at the center of one of television's most successful series quietly stepped into the shadows, choosing privacy over the scrutiny that often comes with fame. His wife, Marie, remained his constant anchor. Their partnership, over 4 decades strong, was rooted in devotion and quiet loyalty. As Jack's world grew smaller, Marie's presence became his compass. She cared for him with unwavering patience, protecting him from invasive attention and ensuring he lived his final years in dignity. Their home in Honolulu became a sanctuary filled with gentle routines, slow walks in the garden, soft music floating through the rooms, the warmth of the Hawaiian sun drifting across the windows. Neighbors who saw him during those years described a man moving with deliberate calm, pausing to watch the waves or admire the sunset, moments that seemed to bring him peace even as memories slipped further away. By the mid-1990s, Jack Lord had retreated entirely from public view. The disease progressed quietly, steadily, erasing the clarity that once defined his every action. But even as his memory faded, the core of who he was remained. Friends recalled flashes of recognition when someone mentioned the show that had defined his career. Occasionally, he would smile at the sound of the Hawaii Five-0 theme music, a faint connection to a past his mind could no longer fully hold. These moments were fleeting, but they revealed a truth that Alzheimer's cannot erase: the emotional imprint of a life lived with purpose. On January 21, 1998, Jack Lord passed away at the age of 77. Congestive heart failure was listed as the cause, though Alzheimer's had already quietly claimed much of the man he once was. When the world learned of his death, tributes poured in honoring the legacy he left behind. Fans remembered the stoic detective who defined a generation of television crime drama. Actors and directors spoke of his professionalism, discipline, and unwavering commitment to his craft. Hawaii itself mourned him deeply. He had become part of the island's cultural identity, a symbol woven into its storytelling and history. Jack Lord's final years may have been silent, but his legacy resounds with unwavering force. He showed that strength doesn't always roar. It can also be quiet, patient, and deeply human. Alzheimer's may have taken his memories, but it could not erase the impact he had on television, on storytelling, and on the millions who welcomed him into their homes week after week. In the end, he remains what he always was, a figure of resolve, integrity, and lasting presence, an island of calm in the vast ocean of Hollywood's ever-changing tides.